in solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight. Everybody's focused on the Trump debate.
Hello.
So why don't we take a look at what's happening with the agricultural world and why it seems everything. I'm finding this correlation that the more the information comes out about crop losses, zero harvest left, massive floods taking out grow zones of entire nations, i.e. China, but somehow all these food losses and price increases that are going to be baked into the cake, absolutely it's going to affect how people look at disposable income. Suddenly, the scatter wave comes in front of it. So I'm wondering how many times has this show been run through history that you can't tell us it's the only time that we've become to this type of awareness around the planet with people connecting more and more. It can't be just the first time it's happened. Does it have to be the technology currently we're using? Maybe not, because, we just don't know how it was in the past of the abilities of telepathy, but I'm sure it's come to the same exact apex of what we see right now. And the one thing that keeps the world churning is food. It doesn't matter if it's now or 2,000 years prior, if food is not available, well, you start to see people get super angry. The only reason I bring this up, because Ransom's hot on the trail of this too, how it's going to affect us. But then again, what are the solutions for such a thing? United Nations comes out and says the poorest of what we consider developed nations, third world nations, however you like to term that, developing nations, have zero harvest left. Now, for me, this is the biggest thing I wanted to explain through the hour here. I have never, ever, ever, ever heard them come out to say something this in your face, dire, gargantuan forecast. No harvest left for these countries, and Ukraine's almost gone to zero because of the war. 30 million tons from Ukraine also gone. Massive floods in China grow zones really ripping through their possible or forecast yields. Huge amounts of stored grain washing away in Brazil from the record floods after the harvest there. Everywhere you look, there's something that's tilted. So how does this scatter pattern come in front of us? And why is it being amplified right now? This is the whole thing I'm trying to also ask Ransom, and we're going to talk about tonight. Is the amplification button has been pushed on purpose by this United Nations article coming out saying that the poorest countries on our planet have zero harvest left. And then they try to forecast out to 2050, well, there'll be even less food every year. But I don't understand. Obviously, the ramp up buttons hit, and then the last thing, I know, Ransom, you're going to love this one. The 33 terabytes of data stolen from the Fed. Now, imagine if they did this. They pushed a bunch of documents they created themselves in there. And then they allowed it to be hacked or were partially responsible for it. And that information being released much like it would with WikiLeaks or some kind of Twitter file drops. Suddenly there's all these documents in there talking about how few buyers there are for treasuries and really the very edge of the banking system, and just to put that scatter wave of fear out there too. Now, you're telling me 2 for 2. So nothing like this has happened to the Fed in over 100 years. And the United Nations coming out like this too. I think it's the first. But both of these giant red buttons being pushed at the exact same time, for what reason? For what scatter wave pattern? So you're not observing something else going on the outside, because you'll be so fearful moving down the food and money trail, let's say. And are they not intertwined? So Ransom, I'm glad you're here tonight joining me. How's the trip anyway?
I had a good trip. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay, cool. No, I had to get back and reset everything.
I did too.
Yeah, it was crazy. I got back and the internet was messed up. The weather had messed up things around, and then all the life support systems were dried up without constant maintenance, which is kind of sad because that for certain people, you really don't get freedom if you're sitting there, trying to protect your homestead. When you leave, everything falls apart due to the weather or the wanderers out there walking the earth looking for something to do, which there's a lot of right now. Which is funny because on the debate there's this two old guys bragging about how they could run stuff into the ground even better than each other. That's kind of my take from it about who does a better job of you know, deciding what's going on for you while the same world plans move along. Now, one side seems to be kind of against it, and the other side seems to be for it. However, that's been the case always, so I don't really expect much in the way of good governance to get us out of the situation we're in. I've been doing a lot of thinking about, I brought this up on another show about genetics and, how does that correspond to today's world and what's going on with probably food shortages to come and world wars and mass migration, and how does that all tie up into each other? And, when the updated draft legislation came out and I read that, it was the missing piece for me on what we've been talking about, we're at the population plateau. The Western world is basically infertile, or by deciding not to have too many children because they do live in a first world country. So they spent a lot more time and effort in less children to have them have a successful, happy, fulfilling life, hopefully a long one. But, there's other factors at work. We have, seemingly attacks from all angles with our food being clean to the medicine. And I can go on about that, but we're on YouTube. But it seems to be that this is the great culling. And, I don't say that to do fear porn. It's just events that have been coming out that seem to be factoids in determining what's actually happening. So to get where I was going, the new draft thing says that people 18 to 26 that are U.S. citizens would be subject to the draft, and that they would put them automatically in the selective service. And if people read a little bit further, the more interesting part is that it says every male within the United States of America between the ages of 18 and 26. Now, if you've been paying attention to the migration and who's migrating, all over the world, people from 18 to 26 years old have been going north out of the countries that they live in into what's classically known as the Western world. Not only would they be able to, strike fear into kind of the occupants of those countries, knowing that they're no longer fertile and that they haven't been having that many children, with the sheer fact that mathematically in 20 years they'll be outpopulated in their own countries. So that, it wouldn't seem like they would be so straightforward, and I don't think it is. So I'm reading that thing about the draft there, and I've been wondering, how are they going to feed our children into this war machine when I would think everybody I know is not going to give their kids up to this idea of a third world war, which would just so happens to be in, the golden growing zones of Europe, so that the food distribution would come to a halt, basically, which involves other nations like China, who have partnered up with people in the Western Hemisphere, namely cartels and things like that. So they have a major foothold in the economics, business dealings, and everything over here. So if we were to, say, go to war over our financial systems, that seems to be the kind of red herring that they're going to use. Oh, it's the money, and, everything's failing because of the war, and that's why there's no food. But I just realized, though, that on a massive scale, they are duplicating what they did in ancient times, and they found a scientific way to mask what they're doing. So I would expect that when we do go to a world war, that all of the new additions to each country between the ages of 18 and 26 years old are going to be sent off into the meat grinder. And, and I wondered, how they would get us to do that. Well, they don't have to. Now they've decided that all the people that they've let in over the past several years on purpose, they're going to be able to conscript them at any time. And to get back to what I was talking about, in ancient civilizations, they would try to kill everybody. So if you're familiar with the Bible, you know what I'm talking about. Kill every last man, woman, and child, even the unborn and their animals, like everything about them. Get rid of them, and then there's no chance of a retaliatory army coming back in 20 years, challenging your power again. So how do you do that on a global scale? You might want to move the mainly men ages 18 to 26 out of the countries that they're from, so that they would no longer be a factor in those areas. Not a real factor. If there's no men, there's nobody to fight. There's nobody to disagree. But more than that, there's no fertile males reproducing their own paternal haptypes of the areas that they're in. So say, for example, you are from Guatemala, and there's a certain amount of men and a certain amount of women that are between those ages, and we can all agree that that's probably the best years for starting a family. Traditionally, we'd go to war to kill all of the males off, but what if you could convince them to just leave their home country and then go to a new country where then they'll get thrown into war, and then not only are they not only in their own country, but they're off. So the likelihood of these people reproducing in their own country, which would be like, where they were at. So effectively, they were conquered without a war happening. Each of those areas are conquered, and in addition, they get to use them for a double purpose of destabilizing the rest of the world, putting people in divisional, conflicts in the countries that they're in, so that it is complete and utter chaos everywhere for a world war. And that way, you also get different people that have different angles and geopolitical ties fighting amongst each country. So, like, if you remember in World War II, almost every country that was part of the Allied forces or the Axis of Evil had agents in each country working, assets and doing little plots and plans. So that would be no different today. And it makes you wonder why, if you lived in a country that's supposed to be protecting you, you would let all of those people that would want to come in and create assets and create networks within your own country, why would you let them right in? Well, we might know the answer to that if we go to World War III and each government decides that they now have control over the mind, body, and soul of each male, and seemingly in some countries, and soon to be the United States, all the females. So you effectively can remove a great portion of the fertile population of any country, thereby crippling it and conquering it. And not even from the direct conflict itself. But it's so weird that they have taken ethnic cleansing to the next level and put a technological spin on it, where they're taking the male and the females out of multiple different, types of people around the world and killing them all simultaneously. It's something so bizarre. It sounds like a science fiction movie, but when you really look at it, that's essentially what's happening. Think about Ukraine, for example.
Oh, wait, Ransom, you hit it on the head. It's not ethnic. It's Homo sapien cleansing. Like,
yeah, exactly.
This is an external force, a non-human entity that's here, a non-human hominid invasive species that's against what we are now. So it is, take that same word and just substitute, because lexicon is important. Change that from ethnic to Homo sapien, and it takes on an entirely different meaning.
Well, kind of where I was going with that is that, certain groups ethnic cleanse other groups. But if you were one group that runs everything, you simultaneously do the same thing to each group everywhere. So yes, that's exactly what I meant by that, is that instead of, concentrating little wars amongst people based on tribal differences, now they can get the entire world involved and directly attack a specific portion of their population, which is the fertile population. And not only that, we all know men in any area would be the only people that could fight against any kind of tyranny or outside threat, or even think about this, those are actually the same people that would be building their country. Those would be the people that would be inheriting the skills from the previous generations to be builders and create civilization in each one of those places. And what they've done essentially is just cripple all of the economies of the world by moving everyone around and purposely putting them in positions to utilize their tribal differences against them. And Ukraine, for example, is the reason I was going to say them, is because if you were a Ukrainian and you were proud to be a Ukrainian and you loved Ukraine, would you agree with if the world government decided that all of your fertile men are going to disappear, thereby getting rid of the paternal haptype that is the Ukrainian? Because that's what happened. So whether you blame the Russians or you blame NATO, it really doesn't matter. It's the Ukrainian males that are disappearing, right? And then the same for whichever countries decide to join into a military campaign against somebody else. That's the people that disappear. Like they used to say, a bunch of sour old men are the ones sitting around tables deciding these things, while the young and robust with futures ahead of them are the ones that are actually being robbed of it. And for what? What is it? What's like the specific thing that you could ask anybody in the public? Why are we going to war? They'll say something that they heard on television or that another politician around the world said. It'll be a repeating talking point. And this is how they control the entire planet. They give you your opinions from the top down. And then, I was watching the debates. They have every one of these little key triggers for the public, and they'll only talk about those things because they want to pull the emotional strings of your heart, this way or that way, so that you really feel like you're part of this side or that side, while the incrementalism continues down the path. Like, they're not going to be talking about poison foods. They're not going to be talking about, altering the biozone of the planet with stuff. So it's right in your face right now.
Cloud seeding.
Yeah.
Don't talk about that aerosol injection stuff. That's just too much for the public to know about.
Well, it's like a giant terraforming program that we don't know what the next wave is. And I've theorized before that, considering we can make baby factories, we can create human-like entities without the parents, that they only really need 20 to 30 years after a complete massive population decrease to set up the world that these technocratic weirdos talk about, like at the WEF. And then, they got people right now all watching whether or not two old guys are going to make deals with those same groups to run your future.
Yeah, and I'll say it again. I was on Mike Adams' program, and I was very clean saying this, that M-Bridge, which is going to be an interpayment system that Saudi Arabia is going to be part of, and a huge amount of other countries can use this as a parallel system to SWIFT, and it is going to be the new settlement mechanism for gold and oil, at least at 1 gram of oil for 1 gram of gold for 1 barrel of oil. Now and they're going to cross swap. So M-Bridge, even though it's running parallel on SWIFT, it's still controlled by the Bank for International Settlements. And everybody out there that thinks like, oh, the BRICS, they're our saviors, they're breaking away. They're also, everything BRICS aligned, what they're talking about, currency cross swaps and using commodities to trade for debt. And I'll pay off this huge loan by using this much manganese or this much, how many millions of tons of nickel that's in our earth. This is all facilitated by the Bank for International Settlements. Still, the same exact players are in the same exact position, switching systems. So you might call it the Great Reset, or you might call it the Great Taking, but the same puppet strings from very on high are the same puppet strings orchestrating not only the last 70, 80 years of destroying our planet in terms of pollution, electromagnetic radiation, but finance as well. And this whole thing about bringing us up to a certain standard of living through these archaic devices that we never needed. And I'd reference going back to Nikola Tesla and magnetic motors and this different type of anti-gravity. Well, electrogravitics was all being experimented with in the 1910s and 20s. You have to realize more than 100 years ago, they were already creating devices that could perpetually power your house in the size of like half of a washing machine. For the rest, never just pay for the unit and you have perpetual electricity in your home. Like these types of developments have been going on, but those purse strings at the top are now trying to give us solar panels and windmills, but we need to cut down millions of trees to put up the solar panels and the windmills. So the crust of our planet is beginning to be covered with actual physical technology, just like you see in some of these sci-fi movies where they would take over a planet and it would be half solar panel or half something on it. We're in the midst of that. And here's another thing with the finance. Bank for International Settlements, you might call them BlackRock and Vanguard and these sorts. It is cheaper for them to buy an entire neighborhood of 100 or 200 homes and tear down all the trees and, destroy all the houses, remove all the houses off of it, than it is to buy those pieces individually or go out somewhere to start a new from scratch project. It's all completely wired onto the grid right there. They buy the neighborhood, they strip everything down, and then they put up data storage centers. It's much cheaper to do this. And then we see more tech on the surface of our planet. Yeah, you could talk about cities as we've been growing since New York and that sort of thing, but I'm talking about just strictly green energy tech. The amount of inundation it has had on us, on our mountain ranges, in the seas, these windmills tearing down millions and millions of trees. This is non-human order on high to remove the natural environment, because you can't tell me cutting down 1 million plus trees to put wind farms in is a good trade-off, or cutting out 500,000 acres because it's going to be comprised of the world's largest solar farm, or even 5,000 acres. And when you go over and you look at it, it's just rolling hills of mirrors and mirrors, not even a single plant in there. So you look at this on high, like who's controlling this, like you said, terraforming project. It's kind of obvious now that the atmosphere is being a little tweaked for something else that breathes an atmosphere very similar, but a little higher concentration of this, a little lower concentration of that, and it's more of a perfect optimum concentration of atmosphere, because humans like a little bit higher oxygen. Everything does, actually. So we got the air, the sky, and the water. All from on high for the Bank for International Settlements, giving all these loans out through the World Bank and International Monetary Fund to get into these nations to bring the same type of chaos you're talking about that create the conditions for these people to leave out of there. To leave to go to these greener pastures called Europe, these greener pastures called Canada, the United States, where they can get in from those areas. And probably I'm going to, say places like Niger and Chad and many of the Sahel nations, Mauritania, get down to the Congo. What about West Africa, Ghana, Togo, Benin also? And then you start to look over to Sudan, southern Sudan, Nigeria also. The new growth zones could be set up there. Now think about all those nations I just mentioned. An enormous amount of those men have gone up to Europe. But with this shifting environment on our planet, the West African monsoon starting to become much more fierce and much more intense, dropping a huge amount more natural rainfall from above, from the clouds. So these areas across the Sahel are getting wetter now. That's why Lake Chad has grown in size over the last 2 years. If you look at the satellite imagery before, it was one of those it's going to dry out to zero and they're going to have to leave. There'll be no water anywhere for anybody. But the inverse happened, where now it's starting to fill. Well, you would expect that because it's at the bottom of one of the African mega lakes. Some 7,000 years ago, Africa was very, very wet, full of full forests. I mean, full forests, And over time, it dried out and those forests disappeared and grasslands disappeared. And those lakes that were bigger than the Great Lakes of America dried out also at the same time. So that little remnant of what Lake Chad is, that is the very bottom remnant of a Great Lake. So imagine if it, like Lake Erie, dried all the way out, way down to this little tiny basin at the bottom and people were living there. That's the same equivalent. Or Lake Michigan dries completely out except for a little tiny section in the middle, and that's what they're living in now. This is starting to get wetter. So what if you were like Gaddafi did, to drill in and then you're going to capture that water from beneath the desert sands in places like the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer, the Sousse Aquifer over in Morocco. Nubian Sandstone Aquifer was the one under Libya that stretch out over into Egypt and Tunisia and Algeria. I think they had something like 12,000 cubic kilometers of water under there in that one area. Gaddafi proved proof of concept that you could tap that and grow crops. He was doing 100,000 acres of sorghum at the time. But now you got the above ground water rainfall increasing. You can tap the Nubian sandstone aquifer, for example, or the Sus, or there's many. And you could irrigate crops in the Sahel. We need to restart the debt system anyway. And you can see the same players are at the top. They know exactly where they're going to reset the debt system. Bank for International Settlements. This, I believe, is the truest, oldest money, the double-headed eagle type of DNA strands. The red and the blue, the elephant, the donkey, it's the same. Red and blue, purple, royal bloodlines. It's just a cycle of ages. Absolutely, I'm going to say unequivocally, part of this repopulation movement thing was in it, what you talked about, Ransom, to an nth degree. Plus, they've evacuated at least 10 million men out of the Sahel area. And it becomes a new growing area that they could get a double rotation crop because of the desert suns with improved irrigation in the modern era. And these are going to be vastly wealthy nations by the exports of their crops. But those 10 million men would say, hey, you can't export that. Hey, you need to let us have more of the percentage of that. But think of it as twofold. You need to get the resistance out of the country so you can get your new crop growing zones or your new economic zones set up in these same poorest of countries in Africa. So if you can get the men out of there, okay, now what are you going to do? You're going to restart the debt system? You're going to bring all these laborers in? How are you going to set up all these things? It's going to require some sort of payment, stable coin. Oh, wait, all these new, central bank digital currencies come flooding out at the same time. You're going to have people from 60 to 80 different countries coming in to reset up these new prosperous zones. I mean, take the Sahel and bring in roads and irrigation canals and airports and railways and electric lines and everything else. There's going to be a lot of people there's going to be a lot of credit started again, and we can restart the system there. But without those pesky 10 or 12 million fighting age men that would be there to resist when these same corporations go in and take over those countries again. You can't tell me if the Bank for International Settlements is in charge of it all, then this is a ruse that you're seeing with this kindness of Russia and China and the BRICS nations to go in and develop these places. Although I am very sure this is the target zone that they are going to develop. But you can see that's why tonight's program, is it really what we see as the world, or is this just one gigantic stage play with all countries involved to bend everybody's mind of the entire planet that this was just done in this form and fashion, and it was just an organic circumstance? I don't know. I think we're being hoodwinked again, Ransom. I'll stop there, but I think this is at least the second or third time in the last 2,000 years this same exact thing has happened.
Well, it's brilliant from the chess piece point of view to move people around that think that they're, doing different ideologies that are given to them, basically. That seems to be the whole way that they hoodwink everyone is, here in the Western world, we got entertainment ideology, and we got the, different forces over here trying to push social engineering. But at the same time, if you take people that have an exactly opposite view of things and view your culture as the enemy, and then open up migration for those people to move in, it's obviously an inevitable that you'll have social and cultural clashes there. But wait, what about the added bonus of sending everyone off to war? And then after that, the added bonus of competition for food. But that's okay because, everybody's moving to complete digital lockdown, scan, trace, and track systems from your phone. This is so funny because I had a string of bad luck. And every time this happens, I realize that I have to update my entire, human domain to fit in to what's new and what's going on. Otherwise, you don't get certain things. Had a hot water heater broke. Of course, none of the parts fit. They have a new type of, linking stuff. It's a good thing that I'm a decent plumber to fix it long enough to find all the parts that I need. But I can't just go off the shelf, get what they're doing because I live in an older house. Same thing with the central heat and air. It's old. It's broke. You have to maintain it. If you don't, you have problems. So the answer to that is to buy the new throwaway things, and every couple of years spend money in those arenas just to have your life support system and comfort at home. And then I broke my phone, which caused all kinds of turmoil with banking. The banks closed. They wouldn't let anybody have their payments. They wouldn't respect me and my passwords and my two-factor verification. It was more like quadruple and more and more. And then I had to link new devices. Like the whole thing's a pain in the butt, but yet they know where you're at constantly. They sell your data constantly. They can predict whether or not you're going to get up and go to the store and buy a pack of cigarettes, or when in the month exactly do you buy your groceries and run out of food. So they have all these algorithms figuring that out, and all of these firms copying and selling your data without your permission or knowledge, for the most part. And people think this only happens through the internet or through their phones. No, the phones are interconnecting with the stores that you go to. You can't stop at any national park or state park without the phone pinging you and getting all your information, so they know exactly who went where when. And then on top of that, you have the web of interconnected devices in your environment that are constantly pinging off of your technology. So they know exactly where you are, what you're doing, and all of that stuff. However, you still have to prove who you are constantly in quadruple and things like that. And all of the banks and all of the countries are moving over to a more severe, intrusive biometric system. And that is because you don't really have a choice, and they will force you to take digital money soon. And that way, there will never be the idea of why money is worth something, versus some other countries' money. What's their GDP? Do they have a lot of products? Do they have good economic setup in their country that allows them to get ahead? That'll never be the case again, because all money will be equal in the digital system. So first you have to have some kind of monetary battle, which will, be concurrent with World War III, if you want to call it that, or a long stretch of a new Cold War. It really doesn't matter. The goal is to reduce the amount of population and then get a whole new demographic and generation on a brand new debt system. But this time will be different because, there's always been loopholes and ways to make money and ways to get ahead if you're smart. That'll end. There will be no more middle class. As they say, you will actually really own nothing and you'll be happy. But instead, you will be metered in all things, and you will lease all properties. You won't be able to have a car that belongs to you. And if you've been paying attention over the past decade or more, they incorporate these user agreements into the functionalities of the products that you're selling. So what they're telling you is they actually own that property despite you dishing out lots of your money to own that. Phones are an example. They actually own the phone. You don't own the phone. You're borrowing the phone. You're leasing the phone. But everything is going to be that way, including food. And at that point, they will be able to tell you how much and what you're going to eat. And that's what we're trying to get away from, that transhuman system. And the only way to do that is just, we've talked about this many times, is just start opting out of all the choices that they're giving us and realizing that there are more choices, not the two binary choices that you always get, either comply or get hurt, or, it's this wing of the government versus that wing of the government on the same poop bird. Yeah, because that's what it is. It's a government, I don't want to say the other version of that, but it's the government poop bird, right? Vote for your side. Do you want the left wing or the right wing, where they circle around and bring you totalitarianism right where the two wings meet? And they're doing this mostly for a distraction, because in my opinion, it doesn't matter who gets voted in, whether you're in the UK, they got an election over there going, and everybody thinks every 4 years or so that there's going to be this revolutionary change in the way that governments all of a sudden treat the citizenry fairly and don't eat out the substance of their very essence. And that's not going to happen. It doesn't matter who gets in there. These are well, founded and long planned, operations that they're doing right now. And they're all coming in cohesion and being at a concurrent time, where we're going to find ourselves just waking up to the fact that there is a new world finally but it wasn't the kind that you were expecting. And, this Great Reset, they have to turn all these old programs off. We just know that. And that's why they're incorporating the Marxist type movements in the countries to help facilitate the crumbling of social cohesion. They know that. We know that. But when everybody is done playing around with their geopolitical arguments that don't amount to anything, right? Or their local political arguments that don't ever amount to anything, they'll realize that they've set up this entire technocratic system that controls everything that we do, how we travel, how we spend our money, what we eat, when we eat. And in order for you to be able to participate in this new system, they will decide what you are going to think and what opinion. So right now, people are on that binary, I like this side or I like that side of it, but it's going to be more complicated in the future. It's going to be you pick our side or you don't eat, or you don't rent, or you don't get to use Airbnb, or you don't get to use Uber, you don't get to go to Wendy's and their cashless checkout. All of these things are happening and people just don't get it because it's so fast now. They were used to the really slow incrementalism of boiling a frog in the pot of water. But guess what? We're about to be cooked. So it's about time to plan around what they're doing and just realize that it's in full swing. So what you need to do is prepare for the next decade and really put your feet in the soil, so to speak, and ground yourself and make sure that you have day-to-day needs met, like on a 10-year period idea here. Because if you look at some of their plans, it'll take 10 years to complete. And anybody that wants to just think about the way the world is right now and all the new things that have popped up that have blown your mind in the past couple of years you never thought was going to happen, but then it did, and then they topped themselves the next week, and the next week the incrementalism is done, and now they're just pushing it right in your face so fast that people are going to have to deal with it now in a faster manner than before, and you can't kick the can anymore. So if you don't have a backup plan on how to work around the system, and what I mean the system is everything that you take for granted, your power, your electricity, your gas, your water, your gasoline, your car itself, the home itself, that's the way it's being set up, is metered everything. And if they get their way with these weird climate propagandas and convince enough people that we're killing the planet by just being on it, then you're going to really have a head twister. See, I was driving through the heart of Texas in West Texas, where if you don't know the terrain, it's kind of the old Texas, plains, all kinds of history there. But nowadays, it's three different things are there. There's agriculture, there's big oil, and now there's massive swaths of land pushing these green energy agendas. And let me tell you, they have destroyed the land with both. It's not just one or the other. However, one of them powers societies and allows it to work. The other one is toxic and it's breaking down and it's going to destroy those environments forever. But the funny thing that I realized is we went through all of the fracking and oil pumping country of eastern New Mexico and West Texas, and all of the wells were shut off. They weren't working. But all of the solar panels were out, and all of the wind turbines were moving in the wind. But the oil production was just at a halt for some reason. And when you realize that old Uncle Joe doesn't want to fill up our reserve, and we used it and sold it, and right now they're debating on who did a better job. At least I could say one side did have us plus in the energy department, and without energy, obviously your side of any conflict's going to have some real problems. So I think we're being set up for a fail from within. And like you said, it's not that these, actions just happen organically between the nations. This is a completely scripted event. The problem is we already know the outcome, and that's a complete transformation of what you consider Earth, right now. You're not going to recognize it. But to be fair, like I said, think about going back to 2010. And we are way off the rails on incrementalism, went off the rails. And this is right now a completely different world. Not only technology, but just the way that people accept reality is different.
Always has and always will be after the reset. Victories write the history. And what you described is we'll have nothing. We'll be renting everything. It sounds like serfdom again. Now, wrap your mind around this. You have to think about serfdom started what? We'll agree, 1200 AD. It's kind of when they say that. And then 1400 AD, you're definitely in the Middle Ages, and there were serfs everywhere. with a traditional timeline. Just follow me along here. But then we moved from that serfdom all the way through of not accepting new systems that were set up. And eventually, people wanted more change. The next generation always wanted more change, more change. So again, it seems like things get reverted back to the 0 point. And they gave us the name for serfdom, but they never really taught us how it worked back then. They just said, yeah, the king owned everything and he lived on the king's land. Well, that sounds very much like what this whole great taking would end up like. You're renting something, you're beholden to the king, you got company stores where you can never make enough money to buy your way out of what is due in debt. Hey, that sounds like credit cards. Okay. The description of serfdom at the time, with the supposed technology of the time, it just seems as if it's another cycle, that it's run its course. And we really don't know what happened from 1200 to, say, 1550, 1600. Traditionally, when so much change was going on at that period, too, and we come into this Maunder minimum in the 1640s when the global temperature dropped 2.5 degrees Celsius, and it was very, very difficult to grow crops in many places. Let's say up to 25% of the world's population perished at that time. Okay, so from 1640 to, say, 1660, 1670 is really when it started to taper off, but 1640 to 1660, that was a tremendous period of crop losses, huge population migration. Back then, the supply chains weren't like they are today. Massive population migration. And then the economy went to shatters too, because if there's not people to live and work in your area because everybody's left to go for literally greener pastures, and that's not a pun. It was they were starving and they couldn't grow food, so they picked up in their wagons and whoever they got out of there, and they went to different places, abandoning where they were because they couldn't exist there. That's another one of the resets. Like, really, what happened at that point? If you lose 25% of the world's population, if we did that today, think about what a gargantuan shift that would be. And that happened only back in the 1640 to 1660. Just that recently, in the last 400 years, it's happened once. And then they're telling us serfdom's coming back. So that's at least twice, because that's 1200. And they start to go, wait, those is about every 400 years this thing happens. And by the way, Ransom, I am completely free on this planet. I only get taxed after my 7th flight for my carbon tax. Now, how dare you? They're not even you see, you're just making things up. I only get taxed after my 7th flight. You know, these are the kind of measures that they're putting in place right now in the UK and Spain. But you know what? Eventually it'll be 1 flight a year or something. They start at 7 flights now because not many people take more than 7 flights unless you're a business person. But I wanted to kind of dovetail onto your talking about the property markets and how things are transferred. During this great taking, I hope everybody saw this movie or read the book or saw the documentary. The plan is just to make it very simple. If there's a financial crisis, all of the money in the bank that's even in your account and my account gets bailed into the bank to pay its debts first so it doesn't collapse. After 2008, they changed the law. If you put money in the bank, you're lending the bank. You're giving them the money. They can choose to give it back to you. You're considered a creditor when you put the money in. They can choose to give it back or not. That's the rule of the law. But now if these banks also collapse, they're allowed to bail in your mortgages as well. So think about that. We have a financial contagion. The Fed got hacked. Who knows if there's planted stories in there to make it appear that American banking is far weaker than it really is, to then, inflame this fear and really get a lot of people to dump treasuries or not accept dollars or get rid of it, whatever. Could go either direction with that. But you're going to have to buy or trade the property from somebody who has no mortgage. Because we're saying that people were positioning themselves and waiting for some of these changes. In the future, if this great taking and the great reset overlap during some financial crisis, anything that has a mortgage associated with it will get bailed in. So if you're sitting with your hand of silver, hand of gold, and say, well, I'm going to buy all these properties, when the property values crash down and hyperinflates and we get into hyperinflation, you may not be able to, except for a very, very, very small select amount of properties where those people were free and clear from their mortgage. Because as we will understand it at that time, there will be no more mortgages. So you won't be able to buy it from an individual who wants to sell it instantly because they're getting underwater so fast, going into some super inflationary event. And you come in with your a couple nuggets of gold and like, I'll take your house for a few pieces of gold here. We'll do the equivalent trade. I'll swap that and take it from your bank and I'll show your note paid. Now my property's yours. That won't happen because there won't be any mortgages to be able to purchase or to pay out the remainder of it and pay off the balance for that. Down to zero. Like I hold it freehold here. I'm coming to buy this person. They have this. They have $300,000 left on the mortgage plus their land, and that's it. 300 here. Here's 5 ounces of gold. That's a 300,000. Now I own that property and mark me as fully paid. That mortgage is reduced down to zero, and I hold that house and land freehold. It just won't exist in the new system that they're moving to. So I think we're being hoodwinked in this way as well. But not to say not to protect yourself with some sort of precious metals or other barterables and tradables during this time. You know, everybody been using gold and silver for, 6,000, 8,000 years. So I don't think it's going to change tomorrow. Central banks are getting on to it. They understand something big's coming. That's the whole thing, Ransom. Not a lot of people are considering how you're going to transact in this post-financial reset bailed-in world of us expecting to buy things now that exist in our paradigm of really the way we see the world working. It's going to be everything's going to be bailed into the banks. And at that point, then if governments pass legislation and say gold's illegal, turned in at this price, then you're not going to, they won't sell any properties until all the gold's confiscated. And then they'll put it on the market, and then they'll make silver, you can only do this much percentage of silver to buy the house. You're limited to 10% purchase price of the house. Everything else has to be paid in the new money and the new digital, whatever form that takes. Like there's going to be a lot of stipulations moving forward. So to work and live in this banking system that we consider you'll be able to pay off a mortgage, it's just going to be a little different. That's all I'm going to say. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
I kind of do, but I think the future of money is going to be in submission. So you think about that. You need a place to stay, and you have a certain sized family. You have to go there. And what if they decide that you have a bad credit score based on your opinions? That'll be the way the new setup is with this digital currency. You'll be completely dependent upon your behavior to access all of life's, things that they're offering: food, housing, transportation. And you've already seen, pilot programs of this going on with debanking and getting basically dehumaning people out of the system. But what's remarkable is, they have backup systems that they have prepared, and everybody likes to think about these dystopic futures with these city centers where you're going to have to live in the 15-minute city, and you're going to have to submit to all their rules, regulations, and the way that they live, which includes metering you to breathe through these made up carbon taxes and things like that. It's basically rent on the planet. But there'll be some other concentrations of people camping. Those will be the people that don't want to take part in this system of monetary slavery. And they're talking about doing that exact thing, and they're actually setting up places like that in every single state where there's just room for you to get free rent and board. The only problem is you have to take their educational program. So that's kind of where we're at. And what do you think happens?
Does that come with a coloring book? Do I get the coloring book in the educational program?
It might be, because they need to re-educate you on, like I see silly stuff out there. Like there's that flag, I forgot what you call it, Appeal to Heaven flag. That's a George Washington flag that has to do with the revolution. And people are spreading it around like it's some kind of horrible terrorist flag or racist flag. It's just silly. And they don't even know the history of that flag at all. It's just that their talking points came down and they started doing it. So these kind of silly concepts are going around. And that's because people don't know their history, and they don't know their history because our education system is not teaching actual education, and they don't want to because educated people won't deal with a digital system that's telling them things are true that are not true, or things that are not true are true. They're just not going to fall for that. And unfortunately, that's like Generation X and up. So really, they're just concentrating on the Zoomers and all of the people that'll be born after that for the mind control portion. And the people that are older than that, what we're doing now is economic warfare to make sure that no one has anything. But that's what these places will be for. To send you so that you can learn how to deal with the new system and admit that you're a problem to the planet and all these things. And these are ideas that they're really talking about. So no, I'm not talking about a communist gulag or any of that stuff.
It sounds like Mao Zedong, 1960s.
Yeah,
Cultural Revolution style, man. You described the Cultural Revolution right there.
Yeah,
like you didn't even mince words. And what you described as a classical description of what the Cultural Revolution was in China in the 1960s under Mao and the Gang of Four. You just described that to a T right there.
Well, that's what it is, right? But it's not going to have. They're not going to be waving communist flags there. It'll just be some committee that decided that your remarks on social media were bad and dangerous, and the idea of private property might be dangerous if they're trying to get rid of private property and things like that. And how unfair is that certain demographics don't own property, right? So you can't have anyone own property if you want to make everyone equal and participate in the new digital system, which will be reward-based depending on your compliance. I mean, that's the way they're all setting up. Right? Like right now, if you have a service and they charge it, and then you say, hey, I want to cancel that payment, I didn't want that, that service will punish you for a long time where you won't be able to connect to that. I've experienced that before. Even though they took it early than they were supposed to take it, they don't care if you deny a payment. And imagine being punished for that in the future. You decided that you don't want one of these services. It is a lot like the Black Mirror episode where people had to pay to not watch the commercials. And if you noticed, all the streaming sites and even YouTube have turned over to this kind of a una streaming platform where you only get the same choices. And a lot of the research is saying that most of these mega corporations will now own probably 75% of the internet. And then when you know that 40% of the internet isn't even there anymore compared to like 2010, the information is disappearing, and they're purchasing it all. So at all angles you look, they have the market cornered on control. The only holdouts will be those pesky ranchers, farmers, people that feel like that they have hundreds of years in the same area, and they have ties to the culture and the land, and they might own it. And guess what? Those people happen to live in every country of the world. But if you can talk the young people on leaving, it'll be a lot easier to take control of those lands when they're off fighting someone else's war. And that's kind of why I bring that up, because it's so sophisticated now, and they get people to volunteer in it. But basically what they're doing is, like, if you lived in an old feudalistic system, and you didn't like the king over there, and you didn't like his kids, and you didn't like their ideas, and they were starting to have grandkids and stuff, you would send an army to go kill them all. But now they have it set up where, you'll volunteer and you'll leave. So your paternal haptypes, the people that you are. So like if maybe you really believe in the country you're from and the people you are, and you have a history, that won't matter anymore, because none of those paternal or maternal haptypes that created that people will be there anymore. Instead, it'll be what they've decided. And they're even almost getting to the point where, by voluntary actions, like in Japan, for instance, there are programs to help people decide who they're going to date. So this is where we get into this alien thing. It might not be an alien thing per se, like you think a little green man or a little gray guy from another solar system, but alien in the fact that it's nothing like humans have faced before. It's a complete top-down algorithm system to run, track, trace everything from your whereabouts to your decisions. And people are just far behind this curve. They don't realize these technologies are taking hold. Like, take the debate tonight, for example. This will be the first debate that's like a full 2.5 to 3 minutes in delay. They usually only would do it about 7 seconds, but tonight they wanted to make sure if anything happened, they could cut, paste, and edit and change your view on what happened in real time. Now that's old school. The scary part is there's technology that can edit things in real time and just change the meaning, change what it says. And if you realize that so many of these technologies are being used by companies, then you'll realize you can no longer trust what you see, hear, or read unless you go verify it with some kind of older copy of information that you might still own, like a book or something.
Yeah, he described the same exact thing in the 1950s when they were thinking the world was getting reset as well, because they were getting pulled out of the farms and thrust into cities, and this new electricity and roadway system was going in, and the world was changing. Think about how much changed right after World War II, and those people got dragged through that could see it after World War II, all the new technologies, at least as technological as we were then, shifted their worlds as well from the agrarian society into great cities. And they saw it coming, and they were talking, our world's changing. We got to, the holdouts are going to be the farmers and thing. And it seems like even within one turning of the lifetime after World War II, something like this has happened to bend the entire society where...
This is the story of the worst road trip ever. In April of 1846, a man named James Fraser Reed, an Illinois businessman, eager to build a greater fortune in the rich land of California, leads 9 covered wagons out of Springfield, Illinois, on the 2,500-mile journey to California, in what would become one of the greatest tragedies in the history of westward migration. Reed found others seeking to find fortune, adventure, and new beginnings on this perilous trek across the West. Among them was the Donner family. Others like the Graves, Breens, Murphys, Eddies, McCutcheons, Kesebergs, and the Wolfingers would come too. The successful Reed was determined his family would not suffer on the long journey, as his wagon was an extravagant 2-story with a built-in iron stove, spring-cushioned seats, and bunks for sleeping, and 2 hired servants to help with the workload. Reed's 12-year-old Virginia dubbed it the Pioneer Palace Car. Also in the group were the families of George and Jacob Donner. George Donner was a successful 62-year-old farmer who had migrated 5 times before settling in Springfield, Illinois, along with his brother Jacob. Obviously adventurous, the brothers decided to make one last trip to California. At the bottom of Jacob Donner's saddlebag was a copy of Lansford Hastings's Emigrant's Guide, with its tantalizing talk of a faster route to the Garden of the Earth. It's tough, but the going's good. Tamsin Donner writes in her journal, I could never have believed we could have traveled so far with so little difficulty. Indeed, if we do not experience anything worse, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started, but as leader of the wagon train, Tamsin's husband George Donner is aware there's one final obstacle to their journey, the Sierra Nevada, with peaks up to 14,000 feet. It's known if you fail to clear the mountain passes before the first snow falls, the repercussions and results can be both horrifying and deadly. As the Donner Party approaches Utah, George Donner makes a pivotal flaw in his decision to splinter off from the main party. Hastings Cutoff says it's a fine level road with plenty of water and grass, saving 400 miles. As it turns out, Donner's information is wrong. In fact, the so-called shortcut adds at least 100 miles to the journey. High in the Sierra Nevada, the Donner Party enters the Truckee Pass. They're only 30 miles from the California plains, but supplies are dangerously low, and traveling through the mountains is taking its toll, ending in a broken axle. The Donner Party stops to make repairs, but that night, 5 feet of snow falls. Soon the drifts are 60 feet deep. The Donner Party will be stranded for 5 months. In just 3 weeks, they've eaten all their food. Then they kill their pack animals. Next, they eat charred bones, twigs, bark, leaves, and dirt. Finally, a suggestion was made that were one to die, the rest might live. Cannibalism. On Christmas Day, 1846, a Christmas feast like few others takes place. They devour their first human. Bodies are cut up, flesh labeled so people don't eat their own kin. Later, 4 rescue parties bring out some survivors. The very last finds a man named Ludwig alone. Around him, a scene that haunts us today and will continue to leave a lasting mark in history. Ludwig is surrounded by bones and entrails, a 2-gallon kettle filled to the brim with human blood. Also nearby is George Donner's body, his skull split open, his brain removed. Tamsin Donner's body is never found. It also seems a man named William Foster shot 2 MIAC Native American guides named Lewis and Salvador for food, which is the only instance of anyone in the Donner-Reed party that was murdered and eaten. The rest of the cannibalized were already dead. They took the survivors to Sutter's Fort, California, by the route that is now known as Donner Pass. Stranded in the early snows of the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly half the travelers died of starvation and illness. Even today, Interstate 80 has to be closed occasionally due to heavy snows and blizzards. Only 45 of the original 81 members of the Donner Party survived. This truly was the worst road trip ever, which reminds us not to be complacent but instead be proactive with our prepping. We don't have to worry about not having food to last. We have My Patriot Supply. And right now, you can save $200 on a 3-month food kit with Adapt 2030. Adapt and stay prepared.
Culture and Jimi Hendrix. Can you imagine their world being ripped apart and they could see the replacement of their old world in front of them too? Moving at a slower pace, though. It's no different what happened then versus what's happening now, but it's just like a global thing now compared to individual nations. So Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us speak our minds tonight here with free thoughts and ideas so we can come up with these solutions together. And if any of you consider free speech something of value, please consider a donation right here, Revolution Radio, with the production costs and the station maintenance, etc. Keep us on air here so we can continue to give you dots that you can connect to make a wider tapestry across all the hosts and information given. That's revolution.radio. Check out that donate tab right at the top there. And as we were on the break, I was perusing through Telegram looking for a quick snippet, and I found this picture, and Ransom, I'm going to describe it to you. It has 2 literal cavemen from like 18,000 years ago in a cave paintings next to them, and they're spinning a stick on a piece of wood trying to start a fire. And one of the cavemen says to the other one, "Don't do it, bro. There will be carbon emission." And I'm like, oh. Sums it up perfectly, because the world we're being bent into is this, where the children are going to start yelling, "Dad, don't turn on the lighter. Might start a fire and there'll be carbon emissions." Like you said, the new currency is going to be submission, but then maybe not for those who are ready and have found a way to move through the chaos. Thanks for joining us. Second hour, Ransom. Take it over, man.
Yeah, it's funny because, I think about my kids versus other people's kids and realize that they're going to be weirdos in the normal population because I'm telling them everything from the get-go. I just there's no reason to lie to children. You should tell them exactly how things work. You should give them both versions of history. They can form their own opinions. You could let them read all of the religions, not just one. You could, teach them history that was pre-religions. Show them how things have changed over time. And they're pretty smart people. And I think that's why they're being targeted. They want to make sure that, the generations that come forth after this reset can be completely ignorant to what it is to be a human, where we came from, how we got here. In my opinion, it's still silly right now. They push this silly race idea that humans are somehow different races, when the fact is that we're a hybrid species of like 7, 8, 9, 10 different hominids that were walking the earth. And none of us are a specific thing or a purebred thing. The whole idea is silly. And this is the simplest thing that they've always used. Like since the beginning of time, all they have to do is find one silly difference between one group and another group, and then set a wedge between that and continually push it until those two groups hate each other. And, when I was growing up, I thought most of that was already gone and dealt with, and that I was living in a pretty exciting world to have an adventure in. In fact, I did have a great adventure. And then somewhere along the lines, about, I'm going to say 2001, they initiated a program to fundamentally change success of the nuclear family. And they did it for a reason, because they want control of all young people's minds. And that way, dictators throughout history have always used the same idea. First you control the woman, then you get the children, and wherever the women and the children go, the men will follow. But even better than that, how about you just destroy the entire concept of a cohesive family, which then in turn destroys the concept of a cohesive community, and on and on until you get nation states and peoples of different kinds. And I was going to show this article because I think it's relevant to today to kind of throw a positive spin on things. As far as rooting for the humankind that's been in different forms on the planet. And the title of this article is Neanderthal Community Cared for a Child with Down Syndrome, Fossils Suggest. And they go through, the different anthropological things and how the bones show that the kid was probably and most definitely Down syndrome and couldn't see more than that and couldn't hear. So he was probably blind, deaf, and also had Down syndrome. But the entire community at the time, and remember, these are when we were kids, they were trying to tell us these were our direct ancestors and they were these dumb brutes that lived in caves, when it turns out they were much more sophisticated than that, and they were living alongside modern human beings for hundreds of thousands of years, not just tens of thousands of years, but hundreds of thousands of years, and interbreeding with them. And they had their own sophisticated ways, but they were different, obviously, than the way that the main human population thought of things. But they did take care of their family. And it shows that even they knew the importance of a family unit. Now, they kind of did it a little different, where they sent the women out to explore and join other tribes versus humans that kind of had women at the center of the village or the tribe. But still, it shows you that even back then, taking care of a group was essential for everyone's survival, and they didn't even leave out people. And when you look today, you would think, well, we're like that. We take care of the old. We take care of the sick. And, we have a lot of social programs that do that. But look at those same social programs in a modern, setting, and they're offering euthanasia, which is something that, if I missed it or maybe I didn't understand, was a bad thing in the last World War, because they were using these same ideas to euthanize people or just outright murder them. And now we have, these countries around the world, and it's also in the Western world that these are being offered, because, I don't think that some of the other cultures around the world would think, hey, you know what? That's so nice that the government will help me pay for me turning myself off. So they offer it for a bunch of different reasons now around the world, because you're unhappy, because maybe you think you're mentally ill, maybe because you think you're too old or you have a disease. Now, I get why some terminal people in a situation might think that that was a choice. But for the other options that they're given for people, like being addicted to drugs when it's their country that allowed the drugs to come in through their borders or whatever, so it's like, here's another way to get rid of paternal and maternal haptypes so that they don't have to compete. And, for a good example of what's going down, kind of on a global scale, is Ted Turner. I don't know how many kids he's got, so don't take this for fact, but it's like 10 or 12 kids, right? And he has, a bunch of grandkids, I think, already. But this is the same guy that's telling you that, that's bad for the planet to have more than one child. You don't want to have more than one child because that's bad for the planet. You're bad for the planet. But me and my people, we're going to have lots of kids. We're going to have a big, legacy, but not you. You can't have a legacy because you're a pesky citizen. You're a peasant. So people don't realize that. But yes, we are going over to a technological feudalist system where they're going to have you little segregated groups of people that think that they're on one side or another, and perpetually have them argue with each other about who gets better benefits in the situation at the time, while everyone, including and especially the individual, gets robbed of their natural inheritance that they got when they were born on this planet. That would be, the right to try to have a happy life, to bond with the planet and use the planet as a symbiotic creature. I'm not saying the Earth is exactly alive, but for all intents and purposes, it is. It brings us water, air, food if we do it right. It just gives to us, and all we have to do is sit around and, kind of coddle it or be nice to it. I guess coddle's not the word, but it's so easy, and people think it's hard. And that's another delusion that they've given the public, is that your existence on this planet should be or is somehow hard, and and therefore you need them to help you. But the truth is that all you have to do is interact with the planet, and you can grow food off of it. And that food feeds animals, and those animals also feed you. It's a completely perfect symbiotic relationship. And now they're telling you, let's take out the main ingredient that runs this entire system, which would be carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, the plants need it. If we don't have a lot of plants, then we don't have a lot of food sources. And that is the main, kind of point that proves that whatever's happening, whether or not some, magical alien or interdimensional beings, or it's an AI system, or a group of really, really inbred, stupid, greedy human beings that are doing it, it doesn't even matter who the boogeyman is. The fact is that they're going right after the heart of the entire life cycle on Earth, which would be carbon dioxide. And they're, trying to list it as some kind of toxin when it's plant food. It's obviously plant food, and we need it. And, that's the silly part. If you could get little kids to realize, hey, well, they did that when I was a kid. I don't know when it exactly changed, but, when I was a kid, I took life sciences like in second grade or something, where they explained that, we breathe in air, plants make air, we breathe out carbon dioxide, they breathe it in. It's just a perfect relationship. Hey, but as an added benefit, if you act now, the plant will give you food too, and you can live on that, and you can grow more of it and help the plant survive. I mean, it's a really good deal that we got, and somehow the government got in there, got involved, and tried to convince massive swaths of the population that doing these things is some kind of bad thing, or bad for the environment, that you're hurting the earth by helping it have life on it. You're being bad by helping plants facilitate the needs of millions of humans and animals on the planet. So is it a bad thing that we feed all these animals that are, half domesticated with us? And now, if things were left alone, you could see a future where we were completely symbiotic with the farm animals and the plants that we grow. And that's what they're trying to break. They're like evil alchemists that are trying to find the right formula to disrupt the only positive miracle that is provable on our planet. So you can forget about the aliens and traveling to different star systems and all that. You have on this planet a perfect relationship if you would be allowed to use it. And that's the sun, the earth, and you, and all of the life that you're here able to cultivate and help out. I mean, because that's what it is, right? We do for the planet does for us. So how could cutting the main driver of the entire system of life be a good thing? And that's what we have to, tell kids. I mean, listen to these crazy mad scientists. They're trying to tell you that the thing that perpetuates life on the planet is somehow bad, and that they need to reduce it. So if anybody with any brain cells in their head realizes this, you are the CO2 that they want to get rid of. You're a carbon-based life form that's interdependent on a carbon dioxide ecosystem there, and they want to get rid of that. The question is why? And I think the answer is because they realize there's just too much competition on the earth. And basically, just like in the old days where the royalty would kill each other off so that they could, take the reins of power. I mean, that's something that we know about between the Caesars or kings or whatever. You could go to any place at any time, and it's always been a thing. Sibling rivalry, familial rivalry, and because the populations kept exploding, and now we're talking millions and millions of people. I mean, think about the king over there in England. If he believed he was special and his haptype and his blood, ancestry was somehow special where he had the right to rule, he would have to remember that over the past, they had lords and, the cousins and the familial relations that went over to the New World, colonized it, and then began a massive population increase of millions of people that share those same genes. So according to them, that's a bunch of competition of people that carry the bloodlines of the right to rule people in the first place. So it'd be in their benefit and really in their dogma to get rid of their rivalry, which is the general population at this point on Earth, because that's just the way it is. The entire Western world, or the Anglo-Saxon Empire, if you want to put it that way, are millions and millions of people that are descended from a small group of people that lived in the UK. Which means that most of those people also carry the same bloodlines that those royalty think that there's something special about. And that's the same thing everywhere on the whole planet. The populations left behind the need for some group or person that believes they have the right to rule. And they hate that. So therefore, they hate you, and they want to get it back to that feudalist system. So now this time, they're using technology as a benefit. And the scary part is people don't realize that you absolutely can be replaced in just a couple decades. And I don't mean like replaced like new populations of people moved in and started living their human lives. What I mean is a completely engineered, completely constructed new life form that will take the reins from human beings. So like Neanderthal and Denisovan and the other hominids disappeared to make way for this new hybrid species we call Homo sapien, the same thing would happen with their newly created and engineered human-like entities. And I know that sounds fanciful, but we're there. They literally are growing brain components mixed with computers, accessing the potential of the human brain, which we talk a lot about, is like a quantum computer. Now, once they figure out how to completely merge that, we now have things like the hydrogel platform and they'll have that so merged that you won't even know your own ideas from the programming, or at least not us, but those people. And for the people that aren't born into that, well, we got wars and diseases for you, and time. Time defeats everything. And, there's a lot of people right now that are strong cultural icons that are kind of fighting what you could blanketly call the New World Order. Those people are going to be 60 in 20 years, but the kids that they create will be 20 in only 20 years. So if an event happens, it might be easy to talk the population and say, hey, we're in some real trouble now. There's barely any food. There's barely any plant life. And our wars and campaigns have destroyed most of the fertile people on the planet. But don't worry, we can open up an eco-life or an eco-life type factory. And in 20 years, we'll have you with new kids. And, we can actually, because we're into the practice of messenger RNA and modified RNA, we can just completely from the beginning create a nice young man or young woman or a young non-binary person in either sex. The thing doesn't even have to be either sex, and then you might know why some of the programs are going on right now to confuse the whole human condition, so that you would accept a new human-like entity that has none of those things, and is just basically a product, like they've been trying to make us for some time. But this one will really be a product. It'll have a serial number. It'll be engineered not to question authority or, have any of these silly ideas of individual freedoms that are inalienable by a god, because, you could teach that thing that there is no God, that you are the God that created them. And then we come full circle with, if you want to believe their mythological stories or that it really happened, you could go back to the Sumerian tales of what was going on, which a lot of the modern religions basically and truthfully are based on, because we know that the stories in them are copied from people that go back, to the city of Ur, which was a Sumerian city. I mean, take Abraham, the basically progenitor of the Abrahamic religions, all three of the main ones, and he came from Ur. He came from Sumeria. So we know where those stories came from. They came from where we thought they came from. And, they're talking about the same things. Let's tinker with this person. Let's tinker with that person. Let's make a more beneficial to us person. So whether that's fictional or not, it seems that the world elite have taken that roadmap or that blueprint and put it into effect now. And now we scientifically can take ideas out of your head or put them in there, as we've talked about on previous shows. The technology exists. They can read your mind. But not only that, they can program the DNA to have certain, behaviors or traits that we want it to have. And when you're really a historian of World War II, you realize that all of those programs that they said the boogeymen were doing there, they continued all of those programs until present day. And just think about behind the scenes, if you have since the mid 40s till now, what kind of advances have they got in the field of medicines and the human body? Well, it's mind-boggling how far it's gone, and I don't think that the normal person can really wrap their head around how far they have got and how short of an amount of time they can use their technology to make it a reality.
Oh man, let me jump on that for a second. Now, since the 1940s, think about that. Just electrical grid on what we've had since the 1940s. Are you telling me that just fundamental energy production hasn't moved forward since the 1950 or late 1940s? Because you look at, like, the main upgrade that occurred at that time was nuclear reactors, and what was the first ones in the early 1950s? And we still sit here today, some 80 years later, and or 70 years later, and we've not even made any advances on just that basic fundamental electrical generation. Are you kidding me? After World War II, they were talking about electrogravitics and Dr. Brown and all these, what we consider super high level aircraft that put a plasma edge out on it, and actually they don't travel through the air. They create a plasma envelope between them in the air that the craft glides through. That is out there now. And all of these things, to answer your question, would make you self-sufficient. But you being self-sufficient, you don't pay taxes. You're not part of the system. The more self-sufficient you become, the more off the system you become. And again, if you're creating something to stay on a system that would be controllable, then you want that same outcome. But, if you talk about since World War II, yeah, there's been some great inventions, the internet, cell phones, etc. But in terms of power generation, we should have units in our homes that generate power individually. We no longer need this grid. It's just fanciful and to even pretend that the technology does not exist there. You can go back to the patents in the late 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s, Nikola Tesla, and all the work that was done up and through World War I. Then Westinghouse and all these things with Edison coming out 1930s in its heyday of development, and all these stories with Marconi and Edison and understanding frequency and vibration and wireless power transmission and how the earth has current lines within it that could transport electric. There's so much known at this time. But again, you even have to think about back then how many trillions of dollars would have been usurped. Like the World War II never would have happened. So you have to look at the reason World War II was planned by the same Bank for International Settlements. A lot of this is predicated on energy anyway, because, after we cut off Japan's ability to get oil out of Indonesia, then that eventually was the trigger for the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor. But imagine in the late 1920s if these same inventions had come out and there was really no need for what we consider fossil fuels, cables in the air transmitting electricity. Transportation, as you know, would be fundamentally different. At that point, there would have been no struggle or repercussions for cutting off oil because we never would have needed to cut Japan's oil off. If that same technology would have been really coming to its heyday in the early 1920s, World War II never should have happened unless it was planned to happen. A lot of these things, looking back through history in the cycles, there was technologies and invention before that could have prevented these. The very reasons why they were triggered are the very reasons why the technology is suppressed. There's that cause effect there. You can't let that out into the public. The traditional story is it'll bankrupt, it'll change society, there'll be trillions of dollars, all these companies will go bankrupt, and all those people working for all this thing, it's terrible, society can't do it. But what if the reality is, well, we need to cut this tech, so they do have to rely on oil, knowing that that would be the fundamental base setup for the new currency further on after this war. All these things seem to have been mapped and planned out early in the 1800s, and we are in the last cascading step here. And the reason I wanted to say about self-sufficient is because we're, like, I agree with you, Ransom, we're not taught a lot of things in school except to obey. And the new currency will be compliance. Well, that's what your currency is, of being able to graduate, to get a job, to have possible value, quote unquote, in the society, is your compliance going through the school system. So you don't fail out. So you get the diploma. So you have a chance to work. So you have a chance to get a job and go, I work at Google. It's the same thing. If you wouldn't have submitted and complied in your classrooms and been like, you know what, I want to study electrogravitics. You guys in your thermo, combustion engines, I'm done with that. I'm not going that way, professor. I'm going a completely different direction. I don't believe in that. And there's all these other tech devices out. That's where the non-compliance and non-submission in our schooling system should come. Hey, there's different systems. Let's experiment with that. The reason I bring that up is because I got this book in my hand here, Think and Grow Rich, 1937, hardback. For those of you interested, I like these kind of books. There was a man, his name starts with a D, Darby, who was working with Edison. And he convinced Thomas Edison to take him under his wing by saying that I will not stop until this goal or this dream is met, because this dream of mine is to be the best salesperson and largest salesperson, and to take your ideas, Mr. Edison, all the way across the United States. And obviously this person succeeded in taking different technologies at the time and getting them on what we consider today a distribution rights across certain places. So he was welcomed in. But here's what he was talking about. And this is the same thing that exists in our society now. And I'll read it from you. When defeat overtakes a man, the easiest and most logical thing to do is quit. That's exactly what the majority of men do. So think about this. Social engineering and media propaganda is targeted only for you, just to do this. They're using magic, soothsaying, and they're like druids in the Hollywood magic right now. In today's modern age, doing the exact same thing, planting your mind with. You're going to be overtaken. But here's the next part here. Great success for hundreds of men came just one step beyond the point at which defeat had overtaken them. Meaning that they went that one extra step, and then boom, they were successful. And if they would have stopped that one step early, they wouldn't have been successful. But it was that next step, that next paper, that next invention, that next speech, that next talk, the next idea that made them succeed. And that's the way my message for tonight is, they would like to, with the media spin machine and, like I say, social engineering and Hollywood magic, to get you to believe that their all powerfulness is unstoppable. But that is absolutely not true. And they want you to stop that one step prior to smashing their system to a million smithereens and it not coming back for thousands of years. This evil that exists. They got their wars planned to try to reduce the movement of agricultural products across the planet. And when that happens, there won't be enough food. They're in the war. There won't be enough fuel. So there won't be enough fuel, A, for the war, and B, for the farming. So keep in mind, when this whole thing kicks off, it's already pre-planned inside there. Because, so far, putting a few dots out there that can fill in some areas, and you can see the interconnectedness, of a lot of things we talked about tonight. Removing food and fuel out of an entire supply chain for the entire planet, even for a short period of time, will have devastating effects. That's what I'm saying. When you start to get self-sufficient, you're going to have to share these skills with others. And also, I would suggest pre-learning a few of them. Start to learn them now when it's not, mission critical. Think about what your favorite thing is, whether it's growing food or canning or preparing something, drying. I like dehydrating as well. Storing things in tinctures, wild foraging, wild remedies, and then putting that in alcohol and tincturing it up. I mean, preparing food, butchering something, growing something, building something. There's an enormous amount of things that need to be done on a homestead where people are growing food. And a homestead would be just like, I live in a house, but I have acres in front of me that have fruit trees and chickens. And on the back behind the house, we got ducks and a small duck pond. And behind us, then there's other fruit trees. Up into the forest, it's nut trees. I will not be defeated and stop before that last breath, even if it's to my own very last breath as a human living out a lifetime on the planet. Because this, I believe we are on here right now. All of us have decided to be here. Tipping over the edge on that 100th monkey effect. Because in order of things that appear to be happening, if you're going to take a solution out of this, the biggest takeaway solution would be not only growing food. That's a pretty easy one to say. It takes a little time to hone your skills, get the seeds, learn how to do raised beds and that sort of very basic stuff. Irrigation, if you have it. I'm trying to set up drip lines right now with, different types of water timers and things on that. But when it comes down to food, where is your food coming from? See, this is another thing you're going to have to start to learn is where your food is really coming from, the food distribution points, where the food originates from, where it warehouses when it comes into a city. And like how, if those traditional outlets stop, like your supermarkets close, where else can you find food? That should be a main number one priority for people to understand, because when this war starts, I cannot say when, but the writing is on the wall and it's been really tense for several months. When it does kick off, and it will, it's in the plan. It's in the plan because these leaders, the Bank for International Settlements, all these great resetters and great taking crowd need you fearful because the food is gone or dwindling or not available. That's the ultimate play and weapon for them to control you is the food. Therefore, knowing that is the biggest pinch point and the main thing they're going to use to control society and you and your family, it would behoove you to find food sources and know more about food than anybody else. Clean foods, bulk foods, where can you go? If something happens and you're prepared for this, let's say an event happens overnight and somehow somebody calls you, I can't believe something just happened over there, and boom, and then you're like rattling on the phone and somebody calling you super scared and you're like, okay, I got it. The minute you hang up that phone, you already know, boom, I'm already out to these 3 or 4 stores I'm hitting the bank machine and everything else. I'm buying all through the whole day. Like that advanced jump, knowing where you can get your bulk goods, where you can get your bulk beans, rice, where can you get 50-pound bags of these types of things to carry you through? Where are you going to get, XYZ supplies from? Where's your extra fuel coming from for the generators in the beginning? Filling up every tank. Have you mapped out where your food comes from? And I would like you to walk you through it. Okay, your supermarkets are all closed. Like there's no more food from supermarkets. The entire ordering chain is shut down with all the computers as well. There's no way to scan anything. And on high has told every store manager, do not even open the doors. We cannot accept cash for any food. So if you think you're going to pay cash for the food, until something starts to really spoil in there and they have to open it up there, and then they'll say, it's a health hazard. We have to destroy everything in here. What happens? Take me to step 2. All your supermarkets are closed. 7-Elevens are closed. Your gasoline station pumps don't work. Credit cards are locked up, and you need to go get food somewhere. Where's your next choice? Obviously, you might know a few people who are gardening around you, but how long? Everybody else knows they're gardening around you, so it'll be a few weeks before there's nothing left in their gardens. Like, where are you going to go get your food? Do you know the people who grow to supply to your weekend market? Do you know your local farmers? Do you know the Amish around your area? Like, you really need to chase your food source down and, like daisy chain it out. Where's it go to? Where's it come from? And, these are some of the solutions that you have to focus on that first. And once you find those points of entry, then you have to go introduce yourself. Hit up the community garden. I know a lot of people are scary to go meet new people and whatever. But I'm telling you, just from my own opinion here, very strong opinion, this war is all around. It's the inverse. It's the tail wagging the dog on this one. The war is planned to disrupt the food and the fuel supply globally. And with already what's happened with Ukraine and already what's happening with the floods and the lost crops everywhere and diminished yields and all these third world nations, according to the United States, and poor nations having zero food supplies left. If you can take out the food, then what? Then you have total control over the population. I mean, total control. And the self-sufficient ones, well, hopefully people come to help them and they'll join the communities. But Ransom, I was going somewhere with the shutdown of agriculture, like the fertilizer won't be there, the crops won't be there, like everything will shut down when the war comes. Supply chain, just think about, there'll be no fertilizer, no herbicides, because all the chemicals will be used for the war effort. Just where's the seed going to come from? Farm machinery parts. How long is it going to take to rebuild Ukraine and turn it back into a functional agricultural zone again? It's going to take 20 years to repair that place. Plus, how much unexploded ordnance is laying around in the farm fields? It's going to take not even in our lifetimes, Ukraine will be back to a full functioning breadbasket, exporting 30 million tons of grain. That's outside the realm of our lifetimes right now. If you're over 40 or 40-ish, barely within your lifetime would that be. If you're 60, Ukraine will not be back to 30 million tons of grain exports within your lifetime. These are the kind of changes here. And these operational loans, that's the last thing I want to say, Ransom. I got bogged down here reading my notes. Operational loans for farmers. If there is some sort of banking contagion, like the Great Reset or the Great Bail-ins, there will be no credit on this planet within 72 hours of an event. Thing is, operational loans for all these farms, everything revolves on credit. So if any financial contagion were to happen where Bill Holter says 72 hours, if you listen to some of his conversations, after this trigger event, it'll be 72 hours and the global economy sees up, there'll be zero credit. I mean, no credit available. But everything on our global agriculture mechanisms runs on credit. So you can see the duality of all these things happening up. Now, if you were to lock up the financial system, you would take down the agricultural system anyway. They just wouldn't have any loans to get seeds and fuel and all that stuff I referenced. Then if you throw a war on top, then you could really disrupt everything, especially if it was a war in Europe. That's a major grain producer. Now that's peripheral over into Russia, Ukraine, and Europe itself. Damn, that's a huge amount of grain on the planet. Seriously, staggering amount of grain. Staggering. Those three areas going offline at the same time, and you lock up the credit on the planet. If you're talking about doing something with the population, Ransom, I'm saying that's where the target is going to be. That mishmash of those events would fulfill everything you just talked. That would be the absolute game plan to come to the conclusion which the number you wanted to reach there or was referenced, not you personally, but what you're talking about. So you have to ask yourself, how do you protect from that? Well, you need to get self-sufficient, know where your food's coming from, be number one, and then, electrical needs after that or power needs too. And I just don't have some of the answers for water purification other than knowing where your water sources are and having extra filters, because eventually after you go through 50,000 gallons, your filter is going to be null and void, clogged up, unusable. Then what? There's only so many things you can suggest as a solution until people start implementing it. So, those are my three. You can just see how everything is so planned and scripted here. I am absolutely sure we are being rerun back through, like rewinding a movie. We're going to go back to the kings in the 1200s and we're going to start it over again. And I guarantee the history books are going to be written. Well, because you got to think about the Battle of the Oak or something back in England in 1200 AD or 88 AD or something. They're going to go, well, the war between the Russian and the North Americans or something. It'll be like a 800-year-old legend of these two armies coming together. But in reality, we'll never know how the monetary system worked 800 years from now. They'll never tell you, just like we don't know how the monetary system worked during the serfdom era. They can say all they want about, well, they had to live on the king. But really, was it like that? I don't know. But we're definitely not going to get the truth in history in another 800 years from now. Ransom, I'm done. Take it over, man.
Yeah, I was thinking about all of that stuff, and really that is the fact that if any real event happened that was a global outbreak of financial ruin, which would be a world war, there would be programs still going, that the governments would get involved and force certain things. But when it comes down to it, you are on your own. And you shouldn't have to be looking for food at that point. That's something that if you're, in my opinion, you're smart, you would already have food that doesn't require energy to consume for a long period of time already. That's number one. And number two, well, actually, number one and number two are really the same thing. You're going to have water, period. I mean, even storable foods or dehydrated foods or, what's the freeze-dried foods, all of that stuff. It doesn't have water. You need water. You have to have water, period. And you have to have water every couple days. So that would be your first priority. And, depending on where you live, there may not be a reliable water source, which means you have to store the water and have something to clean it with, period. So, yeah, you're right. Those gravity things will run out. But if you bought in quadruple or more than that and you expected a time period, so I'm thinking that if you were planning on making it through, you would have to, bare minimum, have 5 years worth of stuff for you and your family to consume during that time. And that's just the way it is. And at least then you'll have food on your belly to look for new resources, which is what you were talking about. Track down your food sources, the fresh food sources. And, you're going to have fuel to run yourself. And that would be the first thing, is have a backup. So it's just taken care of, out of your mind already. And then let's move on to the other thing. What skills do you need? The truth is you have to know how everything runs. You have to know how your car runs. You have to know how to take it apart, put it back together. The same thing with, the backup safety nets of wherever you live, whether it's a well system or no matter what it is, you need to know how to fix it yourself. There's no excuse for not knowing how to do plumbing, for not knowing how to do electrical, for not knowing how to do carpentry, for not knowing how to do automotive mechanical repair. And if you can do those things, you've got the bases covered. That is industry. That is the backbone of civilization, is knowing how to put together and fix things. And I don't just mean fix it by, putting a new part on it. You have to be able to think in terms of how it works. You got to know how it works, so that you could fix it with scavenged things, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about whether or not you're going to be a hunter-gatherer or a victim, because first your food's taken care of, you're going to have to start hunting and gathering resources, or there is just no legacy for you. And that's the thing, is they're trying to bankrupt morally, A, and then genetically, B, and then financially, C, the populations of the world. And I don't think anybody's going to be untouched by this next wave of world events. I just don't think that you're going to be hiding off in your country. Now, if you're a millionaire or, whatever, and you've already got your bunker and years of stuff, well, then good for you. But unless it's completely secret and you built most of that yourself, guess what? There's a whole bunch of engineers and laborers that know exactly where you're at, and they know exactly how they built it. And guess what? If they built it, they know how to take it apart and get into it. That's just the facts. You would have to have, for sure, a set of good tools, both woodworking and mechanical. And I think that after that, those people are going to be the most valuable people ever. True, farmers come first because they're growing the food, but somebody's got to maintain everything and fix everything, or there will be nothing. And believe me, your college degrees on gender studies and even a lot of business and finance and art and all. There's all of these, genres of education that people have gone for because, in fairness, they wanted a success and a lucrative life, and these fields were open. But when everything goes tits up, all of that means nothing. None of those things are worth having or in that world. You need to know how to do things physically with your hands, and that goes from everything from I'm going to say locksmithing, gunsmithing, everything. You need to know how to do it yourself. Now, to some people that sounds overwhelming, but I don't think it really is. I think anybody with a basic IQ between 90 and 120 should be able to figure out all those fields and maybe you might need help, which is where community comes from. And think about the trade that you have. Let's forget money, because that's, that's not really in the equation when things are going to get to a point where it's that rough. Money is worthless. It's just paper. So you're going to have some kind of real skill, resource, asset, or something to trade in for things that you need. And one of those is know-how. If you know how to do things, you are valuable. Just like a medical doctor would be, invaluable if he's part of your community. Now, I don't see what the pharmacist guy is going to do for you. If you have your own PDR, you kind of can do his job for him. And those are the other things. You should know healthcare yourself. You shouldn't need to go and outsource expertise and ideas from other people. And, just really look at the media for the past 10 years. And what have they been really against? They've been against people learning things themselves, having their own opinions, researching themselves. I mean, they've even gone so far as to say it's bad if you research for yourself. You need to look at information through our lens and let us interpret it for you. And who's interpreting it for me? Some guy that did audio video journalism in school and got a job with a conglomerate media company to read a teleprompter, and I'm supposed to, accept his opinion and his view on things when he doesn't know how to do anything. I bet he couldn't change his own tire. I've seen these videos going around of these Zoomers really freaking out about having to figure out things for themselves. Like, oh, this broke, I need it. Like I even see a girl on the side of the road the other day having a complete mental breakdown because she couldn't figure out how to get the spare tire out of the car, which is a simple righty-tighty, lefty-loosey arrangement. And if you can't figure out how to get the tire out, good luck on figuring out the jack and setting up the car and taking the wheel off and putting the new wheel on. These are simple things that in bygone eras people took for granted that they knew. You know what I'm saying? My grandfather, I knew if his car broke, he'd just go out there, and if it was something major, he'd take it to the mechanic and pay him because he didn't want to do it himself. But it wasn't because he didn't know how to do it. It's because he was trying to spread the wealth in the community he lived in. And when they needed something from him, he would get the favor returned. And that's how it should be now. But think about how they've broke down the idea of knowing people. Most people do not even know their own neighbors. As a matter of fact, I had a real cool experience. I went to visit some family in a richer, affluent, neighborhood in north of Houston. And I joked around when I got there because, I'm wearing, I guess poor clothes, but more like utility type clothing. I like to wear stuff that I'll be comfortable in, and no matter what environment, I dress for the environment. And my clothes are durable. I like that. But I pull up in my Honda and I joke around about, well, what's going to happen is some Karen in this neighborhood is going to see me. They're going to see that I don't look like I own one of those houses and that I don't particularly fit in with the dress code of the area. And, I bet they'll call the cops on me saying something stupid. And within like 10 minutes, police showed up, wanted to know what I was doing in there. Someone had made a false accusation that I was breaking and entering in the house we were staying in, even though, it was pretty obvious that it was a family visit and that it was welcome and that the people that live there. And what it told me is they don't recognize their neighbors, for one. They don't even know who lives there. And two, they're so worried about what other people are doing, they're not paying attention to what's going on in their own lives. So if you're running around the neighborhood worrying about what's happening at someone else's house, what's going on at your house? And just the fact that no one knows each other, they all distrust each other. They think everyone's up to no good, which, I get that. I really do. But at the same time, it shows you what different worlds people live in. I wouldn't, if I saw somebody out in my neighborhood, I'd ask them, if they started walking around looking like they needed some help, I might ask them if I could help them or something. But, I'm not going to call the cops on them because I don't recognize them out there on a public street, but that happened. They're worried about it. And it's not because I'm a certain minority or any of that other stuff that people think it is. It's simply about have and have not. And once the money is worthless, all of those people are in the have not. And another thing I did notice, not to, judge people, but a lot of the rich people have no food in their house. None. Just visiting and doing social stuff. They have resources, yes, but like the actual refrigerator, some people do because they're smart, and other people depend on these new ways to get food. And I think there's just too many people that are now on the just in time delivery system, like from Japan. They did that for business, but that's spread through the entire way that human civilization works. Most of the people, like in New York and different places, they get every bit of their food from a restaurant, a convenience store, like a bodega, or they have it delivered. And even in the poverty area where I live in, I see the Uber Eats guy all the time. That means people are not cooking. They're not having food, at hand in their home. They can't be if they're eating all that. And what's the real mind blower is, even if you did go to the grocery store and stock up on those boxed foods and stuff, it's the same food that they're delivering from the chain fast food outlets. It's basically the same thing. You can go to the store and you see all the same fast food brands with their ready-made food, with all their forever chemicals and plastics and, God knows what else. But it's the simple person, the simple farmer. And don't get me wrong, a lot of rich people, they weren't born with the silver spoon up their rear end. They actually made it there through hard work. So I'm not knocking that. There's a lot of those guys that have what you would think is a mansion, but it's full of redundancies for them because they wanted to protect their legacy. So I'm sure that they have food in their house and they have tools and they know how to fix things and stuff. So it's not really about which class you're in. It's just a mentality. So anybody from the poor class to the rich class should have those same skills. You should be able to fix anything that's in your property, like whether it's air conditioning, the plumbing, the electric, your car. You should know how to grow food yourself. You should know how to cultivate it. And not only that, it wouldn't be a bad idea to learn your actual environment out there and know what foods on the side of the road can be eaten and not eaten, because, Bambi knows. And I was thinking on the way there, I saw a lot of deer. And you know how deer like to eat that nice, fresh green grass after it's been mowed by the state, by the side of the road, which baits them out, by the way, to the road. So they're out there by the road and they're eating all that nice green grass that they're full of glyphosate, full of forever chemicals, full of pesticides, herbicides, and other. So even the wild meat is tainted. If you want to keep that in mind, that think about all these creatures that live in the city that you might think you might want to try to eat if things were bad, like squirrels and rabbits and other stuff. They're eating all that store-bought GMO seed, and they're running around in the toxin areas where they're spraying their stuff with, I'm sure, Monsanto and other kinds of weed killer and bug killer and pesticides, fungicides, herbicides. I mean, like the list goes on. So really, you have to be in a position to know all of these things yourself. Whether you got a super IQ and a super big education really doesn't matter if you don't know how to turn a wrench or grow a seed.
I'll agree with that. For the Karens out there, I got a 48-inch mower, and I need you to fix it, because what I learned trying to fix all my gear that breaks continuously on a farm is tracing down the gas lines, which were a little bit old, had to be replaced, along with the fuel filter coming up into the jet being clogged in the carburetor. Needed to take that out and spray it. And of course, the voltage regulator was off, and part of the starter had chipped off on the flywheel house, so we had to replace that. And then the carburetor was out of calibration a little bit to try to, get the valves in sync again. These are the kind of things that I had to learn. So tell a Karen to go start, figuring out your mower for you so everybody can eat for the day, or get a tractor up and running. We're talking about hydraulics and all these things. The only way to learn it is go do it. Because when I started on the mower, I'm like, I had to get, and every time somebody comes to help me fix, like my neighbors are way better at mechanics than I am. When I ask somebody, I'm always trying to learn from them. Like, again, you picked that class where of peoples who just go in and pay for something, and then they come and get the repair, and then they pick it up and they get the bill. Like, for me, that was tuition for a class. So however much it might have cost to get the mower fixed, while I'm there helping the person, or when they come over here into the farm to help me fix it on site, I'm there turning screwdrivers, learning, asking questions, because I'm paying for that fee for the class for the day to get that motor repair class. If you change your mind in that direction alone of how you're spending money. Learn what you need to learn to repair things. Now I'm into repairing wooden tools and putting new handles on things like shovels and hoes, these kind of things, rakes, mattocks. Like, how do you put an axe handles? I put in new hickory handles, carving them to fit them in, and then, putting some sort of splitter in there to get it to wedge out and gluing it in. Like, these are skills that only old people did before. You always bought something new and threw it away. Now you need to start repairing stuff because the steel's still good on it. It's just the handle's broken. You're never going to learn anything unless you do it. And that's my greatest, takeaway tonight. There's a lot of skills to learn. You can learn to be familiar with a lot of them by doing something, repairing, and helping around. Because somebody can always use the help, even if it's pass me the screwdriver. And you know the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead, and you know the different millimeter on the wrench sizes for the sockets or the wrenches and the crescent wrenches. If you know that simple stuff, please help me, because I could say, hey, I'm down there. Hey, can you hand me a 10 millimeter wrench or whatever? And as long as you know the basics and you keep honing your skills, there's always people that can need your help. Probably my thing is just get out there and do something, do anything you might be interested in, because you're going to learn continuously along the way of jack of all trades skills. Like, we all knew how to do all of this. All of our grandparents did. Because everybody in the community all knew how to do it. And everybody at the base of society, that was the basic, that you knew how to do everything like that in the communities. Because they came from the farming legacy before we got split into the cities in the 1950s. We got from a